The Anti-Germans, the Pro-Israel German Left, by Simon Erlanger. It is no secret that the German left's outlook today is and has been for some time predominantly anti-Israel and anti-American. Far less well known is the existence of a small but influential pro-Israel movement within the German left, a movement which challenges the existing anti-Israel consensus. The quote, or so-called, anti-German movement, as it is known, grew out of a communist student organization. In 1989, it finally emerged as a movement in its own right in opposition to German reunification. Fearing the emergence of a new fascism from the social and political dynamics of reunification, the anti-Germans fight any manifestation of German nationalism, aligning themselves with the victims of Nazi Germany and their descendants. Likewise, seeing elements of German nationalism in the German peace movement, the anti-Germans have become its strong opponents. During the 1990s, the movement perceived modern-day German existence as dominated by dynamics between the state, economy, and society similar to those that led to National Socialism and the Holocaust. Today, the anti-Germans discern fascism and militant anti-Semitism as most apparent in Islamism, and therefore strongly denounce militant political Islam. At the same time, they offer unconditional support for Israel, the Jews, and the U.S., in opposition to the dominant political discourse amongst the German public in general and the left in particular. Unable to form a mass movement or an organization large enough to take an active role in political life, the anti-German movement has become an influential publicist movement centered on several magazines and journals. As writers, social scientists, and journalists, anti-Germans have been able to exert a growing impact on the left and on public opinion. Ever since the emergence in 1968 of a new left, anti-Zionism has been an integral part of the creed of the German left. In the aftermath of the Holocaust, the old Union-oriented German left took a largely pro-Israel position. Yet in the second half of the 60s, under the influence of the protest movement against the Vietnam War, and the reign of the ideologies of anti-imperialism and anti-Americanism amongst the student movements, the new left emerged. Prior to June 1967, there was still widespread sympathy for Israel. Following the Six-Day War, the tide turned completely. Israel was now identified with imperialism and placed in the same imperialist category as the United States, which had already become the preferred object of hate among the protesting youth of Western Germany. Thus, in a strange twist, the student activists who had previously risen up against the suppressed Nazi past of their elders now attributed their parents' sins to the victims. They also associated these sins with the United States, one of the nations central in defeating Nazi Germany, ending the Holocaust, and bringing democracy and prosperity to Western Germany. This psychological projection did and does serve to alleviate German guilt. However, while the student generation of 1968 could thus begin to make its peace with the generation of, quote, perpetrators, the victims were delegitimized and once more became threatened. Although continuing to identify with the murdered Jews and their culture, some of the militant generation of 1968 began to rise up against living Jews, resulting in attacks on Jewish targets, such as the failed plot to bomb the Berlin Jewish Community Center on the 9th of November 1969. This process culminated with the turn of militant proponents of the new German left to international terrorism. In their fight against imperialism, these militants cooperated closely with Palestinian terror groups, taking part in the hijacking of an Air France plane to Entebbe, Uganda. I don't know if I'm saying that right, in 1976. In fact, in an act reminiscent of the selections on the ramp at Auschwitz, the German terrorists divided the Jewish from the non-Jewish passengers, despite the fact that this act sent profound shockwaves through the German left, leading some to reconsider their anti-Israel bias. By the late 1970s, Palästina Solidarität, I don't know, well, it's in German, I'm not pronouncing it correctly, and an anti-Zionist consensus had emerged amongst the new left. A number of writers and observers, such as Jean Emeret, Theodor Adorno, and Eike Geisel, identified this phenomenon at a relatively early stage. Yet it was in the strong anti-Israel protest in Germany during the Lebanon War of 1982, including its numerous comparisons of Israel to Nazi Germany, which sparked the first intense debate on anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism within German left-wing groups. At first, the controversy took place largely within the intellectual circles of the left, reaching a wider audience with the publication in 1986 of Der ewige Antisemit by the journalist and writer Henrik Broder. In numerous examples, Broder repeatedly drew attention to the emergence of a specific anti-Semitism of the left, disguised as and growing out of anti-Zionism. While Broder's book was a polemic, historian Daniel Dinner and political scientist Andrei S. Markovits wrote scholarly works on anti-Americanism and anti-Semitism, and other authors have since followed suit. Recently, historian Christina Späti described in a detailed study the very same development in Switzerland. Similar studies also exist concerning Austria. While the anti-German movement extends to Austria, with some leading anti-German intellectuals residing in Vienna, Germany lies at the center of the discussion in this article, since it is there that, since the early 1990s, the anti-Zionist consensus of the left has long been the anti-Zionist consensus of the left has been challenged from within, and the anti-Semitism of the left has become a hotly debated issue. Origins against reunification. The challenge to the anti-Zionist consensus of the left can be traced to events surrounding the German reunification in 1989, together with the growth of the so-called anti-German movement out of the Kommunistischer Bund, a small communist student organization founded in 1971. In opposition to other groups of the student left, the Kommunistischer Bund was financially and politically independent and not bound to any of the communist parties of Eastern Germany, the USSR, or China, making possible a certain diversity of opinion within its ranks. It also differed from other groups in the negative view of German history that it took. In its Faschisierungs, these it looked upon in its Faschisierungsthese, or These, Faschisierungsthese, it looked upon the emergence of a new fascism as a realistic possibility which could come about at any moment. When by 1985 this had not transpired, and West Germany seemed to be a safe democracy, an argument broke out in the KB which tore it apart. A minority still regarding the emergence of a new fascism as a real possibility. With the arrival of reunification in 1989, the split in the KB intensified, the minority joining other groups such as the Hamburg Radical Left. By 1991, the KB had dissolved and the minority had left, reorganized, and named itself Group K. Members of this group included writers such as Jürgen Elsässer and Matthias Kunzel. Matthias Kunzel is a pretty prominent author on anti-Semitism now, so it's interesting to know that he emerged out of this group. I don't know who Jürgen Elsässer is. Who were to play an important role in the anti-German movement. Group K edited the journal Bahamas, which together with the magazines Jungle World and Konkret became the central voice of the anti-German and anti-national movements that grew out of, amongst others, the KB, Radical Left, and Group K. All of these groups opposed reunification. They called themselves anti-German or anti-national, adopting the slogan Nie wieder Deutschland, or Never Again Germany. Due to the social and political dynamics which reunification appeared to unleash, as well as the disproportional geopolitical and economic weight of a united Germany was believed to have in Europe, they feared the emergence of a new German Reich. The publisher Herbert Gremliza, who since 1974 had headed the monthly magazine Konkret, resigned from the Social Democratic Party at the same time. A strong opponent of all manifestations of German nationalism and patriotism, Gremliza was repulsed by the singing of the German national anthem by members of all of West Germany's political parties in unison, including the Social Democrats following the demolition of the Berlin Wall. It reminded him of the Social Democrats joining the National Socialists in singing the German national anthem in 1933, following Hitler's declaration of his foreign policy. Thus came into being the anti-nationalist and anti-German left. Its members felt justified in their opposition to reunification by a rise in racist attacks following 1989 and a general increase in the strength of the extreme right. For them, reunification brought with it the danger that the latent fascism of the collective German identity, the Volksgemeinschaft, suppressed effectively by the Allies through measures of re-education and control after 1945, could now resurface again. To this day, many anti-Germans oppose any display of German national symbols, including the German national flag, even on such occasions as the Football World Cup Championship of 2006. The anti-German and anti-national movements first made their public appearance at the two large demonstrations against reunification on the 12th of May, 1990 and the 3rd of November, 1990. Whereas at first, some 14,000 people gathered in Frankfurt to protest against, quote, German nationalism, the colonization of East Germany, and the annexation of the GDR, end quote. The second demonstration slogan, quote, Death is a master from Germany, end quote, attracted an attendance of only 8,000. This signaled the beginning of the end of the anti-Germans as a mass political movement. The anti-Germans boycotted the first all-German elections, held on the 2nd of December 1990. In addition to this, when reunification progressed smoothly and did not lead to the establishment of a fascist entity, most adherents lost interest and left. Those who remained cited the discussions on Germany's eastern borders and a rising anti-Semitism as the reasons for doing so. In their opposition to right-wing activity, the anti-Germans subsequently became part of the Antifa, a loose network of so-called autonomous anti-fascistic left, most of whom, in their fight against capitalism, took to the occupation of empty houses and demonstrations against, as well as street battles with, extreme right skinheads and extreme right National Democratic Party, and the extreme right-wing National Democratic Party. Support of Israel. A year later, during Operation Desert Storm, 1991, the anti-Germans and anti-nationals resurfaced as a political force on the left. Expressing unconditional support of Israel, they took a stand against the German peace movement. This movement had not reacted to the Iraqi occupation of Kuwait, yet hundreds of thousands protested against subsequent U.S. and Allied intervention in the conflict. The anti-Germans and anti-nationals, gathered around the magazine Concrete, considered the peace movement to be morally bankrupt. They favored the war and the restoration of the international order as a measure against a totalitarian regime which reminded them of Nazi Germany. Likewise, they saw it as a monstrosity that German technology delivered to Iraq now threatened Israel, while the peace movement protested only against the military action which would remove a threat to Israel's existence. Some of them saw in this peace movement a new manifestation of German nationalism. However, not all favored the war against Saddam Hussein, fearing that even modest German participation in it could become a first step to, quote, great power politics, which they would not support. The debate on support for the war out of historical responsibility for Israel led to further fragmentation of the anti-Germans by now a very small movement of intellectuals. Nevertheless, through the magazines Bahamas and Concrete, their opinions continued to be heard. In 1995, the movement again moved into political action. That year witnessed two national remembrance days. The 13th and 15th of February, reunited Germany commemorated the 50th anniversary of the destruction of Dresden by Allied bombers. Under the slogan, quote, "We do not mourn," the anti-nationals strongly opposed any commemoration which would, in their eyes, lead to a moral equation of the bombing with the Holocaust. They claimed that the destruction of Dresden had been a military necessity to defeat Nazism and liberate the concentration camps. In their view, therefore, it was necessary to defend the destruction of German cities in order to express solidarity with the victims of the Holocaust. For them, this was proof of a leftist conviction. A substantial number dissented, and discussion of the position, which was, needless to say, rather unpopular among the general population, led to yet another split within the movement. The autonomous and other Antifa groups who wished to appeal to the German masses and did not think that the anti-national position would further this aim, parted company with the anti-Germans and anti-nationals. The 50th anniversary of the end of the Second World War finally completed the break of the anti-Germans with the majority of the German left. This once again marked the end of the anti-nationals and anti-Germans as political movements for some time. Group K also dissolved. Despite a certain disdain for active politics after 1995, the anti-nationals and anti-Germans continued as academic movements, producing an impressive number of learned articles and statements. The magazine Bahamas continued to appear, forming a focal point for this intellectual movement. At the same time, the movement also gave itself an ideological and scientific basis in the critical theory of the Frankfurt School under Theodor Adorno and Max Horkheimer. Apart from its Marxist roots, this critical theory has also been shaped by psychoanalysis. Differing uses of psychoanalytic categories may account for the varying results of the anti-German social analysis. From this derives the relative unimportance attributed to, or the deferment of, economic questions and the political demands of the anti-Germans, as well as their strong emphasis on criticism of ideology. The influence of psychoanalysis within critical theory has had many ramifications for anti-German thinking, including its notion of communism. In any case, the prominence of Marxist elements in anti-German thinking continually diminished during the 1990s. While still envisioning some kind of ideal communist final stage for human history, many anti-Germans actually came close to what might best be described as classical Western liberal thinking. Goldhagen. It was on the basis of this rather academic and literary activity that the anti-Germans reacted to the controversy over Daniel Jonah Goldhagen's book, Hitler's Willing Executioners, Ordinary Germans in the Holocaust, which preoccupied the German public in 1996. Hitler's Willing Executioners put forward the theory that there was a specific German, quote, eliminatory anti-Semitism, which made the Holocaust possible. When the book was published in Germany, it caused ideological controversy among the anti-German and anti-national left, some members of which viewed this debate as a test case of quite how ready the left was to deal with the lessons of the Holocaust. Some stuck to Marxist models, judged by others as inherently anti-Semitic, while others tried to fit Goldhagen into postmodern theory. The controversy within the anti-Germans was accentuated by the publication of the book Goldhagen und die Deutsche Linke by a group centered around Matthias Kunzel. This work attempted to analyze how Goldhagen's thesis was received by the German left, if at all. Kunzel and his group came to the conclusion that the German left and the anti-Germans had actually avoided dealing with Goldhagen's central thesis, that the theoretical basis of anti-German ideology could not explain the Holocaust. This caused an intense debate within the anti-Germans, which for the most part took place in the pages of the magazine Jungle World. Three factions emerged. One based on postmodern discourse theory, another on critical theory, and the third which gathered around Kunzel, considered understanding the reasons for the Holocaust to be of great importance to the anti-Germans. In their debates with orthodox Marxism and postmodernism, which were not restricted to the Goldhagen controversy, the anti-Germans set themselves apart from the rest of the German left. The controversy also marked the departure from the movement of the faction that explained anti-Semitism through postmodern theory. This faction went on in 1997 to set up its own journal, 17 Degrees Celsius, which deals almost exclusively with postmodern theory. Return to politics. Whatever remained of the anti-national and anti-German movements returned to the political debate in 1999 when NATO went to war against Yugoslavia over the escalating situation in Kosovo. I think I was criticized in another video for saying Kosovo wrong. I'll just say it. Kosovo. But maybe I'm still pronouncing it wrong. I think that's how the person told me to say it. I can't remember. At first, it seemed that the movement agreed in its opposition to this war. Yet all too soon a rift opened between the anti-nationals and the anti-Germans. While the anti-Germans called for solidarity with Yugoslavia, the anti-nationals opposed equally all participants in the war. Both anti-Germans and anti-nationals held Germany's early acceptance of Croatian independence responsible for the eruption of the Balkan Wars. They alleged that Germany continued the Balkan policies of the Third Reich through its pro-Croatian and anti-Serbian policies. The anti-nationals went further, holding the regime of Slobodan Milošević responsible for mayhem in the Balkans and expressed their opposition to all nationalisms, a position vehemently opposed by the anti-Germans. The latter saw in Kosovo, in the Kosovo crisis, the return of the constellation of the Second World War. The author and journalist Jürgen Elsässer, sorry, trying to keep my German correct pronunciations. Work on my German pronunciation game, but probably not too great. Anyway, a prominent proponent of the anti-German movement even claimed that Germany was fighting against the victims of the Second World War. Yugoslavia and Israel were both created after the war by victims of the Germans. It was for this reason that the anti-Germans felt the need to support them at any cost. Although the anti-nationals and the anti-Germans parted company at this juncture, the basis for their strong support for Israel had been laid. The Second Intifada and the terror attacks of September 11th. With the outbreak of the Second Intifada in 2000, the attitude to Israel became central for the anti-Germans, who by then had regrouped around the magazine Bahamas. In light of the Palestinian terror attacks, they urged solidarity with Israel. In Germany, they were the first to notice Arab anti-Semitism, which resembled the eliminatory anti-Semitism of the Nazis, stating that in it, Israel faced one of the most aggressively anti-Jewish collectives in history. They went on to argue that there should be no concessions to the folkish Islamist collective of Jew haters. I think there's supposed to be quotation marks there. Maybe not. I don't know. There's no quotation marks, so just assume. I don't know. I guess that's just what the author said. Let me repeat it. They went on to argue that there should be no concessions to folkish Islamist collective of Jewish haters. Of Jesus Christ. Sorry, I shouldn't laugh. This is an appropriate topic for laughing, but I'm amazed by my own incompetence. They went on to argue that there should be no concessions to a folkish Islamist collective of Jew haters. On this basis, the anti-Germans criticized the peace process as a historical mistake. Within Germany, they were quite alone in this attitude. Their solidarity with Israel was a response to the German left's, quote, strong support for the Second Intifada, end quote. End quote. An anti-Zionist consensus formed from the political left to the political right, end quote. that they perceived as deeply anchored in German society. The attacks of September 11th added a pro-American stance to the outlook of the anti-Germans. They were repulsed by the anti-Americanism conspiracy theories displayed in many German reactions to terror attacks, especially on the left. Anti-imperialist theory blaming the U.S. and the West for all the ills of the Third World was refuted by the anti-Germans. They saw the attacks as, quote, fascist massacres by, quote, Islamo-fascists, mainly motivated by anti-Semitism and anti-Americanism. Uniquely for leftists, the anti-Germans explicitly supported the U.S.-led wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. Justus Wertmüller, editor of Bahamas, explained the anti-German position in the following manner, quote, "The problem is still that German and Islamic resentments are identical, anti-Western, anti-liberal, anti-Semitic. German-Islamic friendship stems from the fact that the Germans recognize themselves in political Islam, because it is fascist and at the same time gives the impression of being an indigenous culture." End quote. For the anti-Germans, Islamism is the new fascism. German history has demonstrated that fascism must be fought without compromise. Likewise, the support of Israel as the refuge of the victims of the Holocaust must be unconditional. Together, the historical critique of Nazism and the view of Islamism as the new fascism explains the strong commitment of the anti-Germans to Israel's survival and its right to self-defense. These factors also explain why they perceive Israel, and diaspora Jewry, for that matter, as extremely vulnerable. The anti-Germans, in defining terror as a result of extremist ideology, rather than socioeconomic conditions, in interpreting Islamism as, quote, Islamo-fascism, and unconditionally opposing it, and last but not least in their support for Israel, have become similar to American neoconservatives. It even seems that they borrowed the term, quote, Islamo-fascism from that group. Similar to the American neoconservatism, similar to the American neocons, the anti-Germans try to defend what they perceive as the positive products of a yet incomplete process of enlightenment against those forces which are attempting to, quote, turn back the clock and gravitate toward new forms of barbarism. It was this line of thought that brought the anti-Germans to support the Second Gulf War in 2003, in complete opposition to the position of the German government and the majority of the German public. All anti-Germans opposed the peace movement as deeply German, anti-Israel, anti-American, and immoral. It remained silent on Saddam Hussein's crimes while exposing Israel to deadly danger. Bahamas and Jungle World fully supported the U.S. invasion of Iraq. Concrete was more ambivalent, although it did call for Saddam Hussein's removal. The anti-Germans perceived a clear and present danger for Israel's existence in Iraqi weapons of mass destruction and Saddam Hussein's support of suicide bombers. It was during the Second Gulf War and its aftermath that the anti-Germans caught public attention and became an influential force through the many articles, books, and journals that they published, addressing subjects from Islamism to anti-Semitism. Anti-German groups sprung up throughout Germany and Austria. Increasing numbers of small, non-Jewish groups, waving Israel flags, can be seen today at demonstrations, thereby redefining the anti-Germans' opposition to national symbols. Yet the most important legacy of the anti-Germans has been to the writers and young scholars influenced by the movement. This influence pertains also to a broader intellectual public in Germany, Austria, and to a lesser degree, Switzerland. The K-Ära publishing house in Freiburg im Breisgau has published anti-German texts. Hermann Gremlise has published a series of books criticizing general German attitudes and defending Israel, including Amerika, dich hast sich besser, Anti-Amerikanismus und Antisemitismus in Europa by Andrei S. Markowitz, as well as works by Thomas von der Sachenosten and Yakov Lazovic, the former director of Yad Vashem's archives. Matthias Kunzel's book, Jihad und Judenhass, über den neuen antisemitischen Krieg, which focuses on jihadist ideology, has become essential reading. It was recently translated into English as Jihad and Jew Hatred, Islamism, Nazism, and the Roots of 9/11. On the 15th of April, 2008, Gregor Gysi, one of the heads of Die Linke, a merger of the West German extreme left, and the PDS, successor to the East German Stalinist SED, warned of the dangers of the left's anti-Zionism. Instead of one-sided support for the Palestinians, Gysi called for solidarity with Israel. For the extreme left, this constitutes a change of paradigm, probably unthinkable without the relentless writings of the anti-Germans. Gysi may to some extent have acted under pressure from a group within his party's youth movement called BAK Shalom, influenced by anti-German thinking, as well as due to public criticism directed against the more hardcore anti-Zionist elements within the party. These hardcore anti-Zionist elements continue to play an important role within Die Linke. A few days after Gysi's warning, on the 19th of April 2008, Franziska Drozel, the president of the Young Socialist, Jusos, the youth organization of the more mainstream SPD, sharply criticized the anti-Semitism of the left. She attacked conspiracy theories and anti-Zionism using the analysis developed by the anti-Germans. Drozel also asked the left to distance itself from Islamism and to fight actively against anti-Semitism. One may hope that the tide is now turning, and that, due to the work of the anti-Germans, the German left has become more sympathetic to Israel than it was in the past. Conclusion. the anti-German movement remains small as a result of many fragmentations and ideological rifts and splits, yet not without influence. Its members will never constitute a political mass or form a big faction within one of the current two major parties of the German left. Precisely because of the many splits it has undergone, the anti-German movement, whose origins lie in one of the K groups, has become heterogeneous. It is comprised of former K group members, as well as Antifa activists, certain autonoma writers, and undogmatic left-wing students. At the same time, there have also been breakaway groups or individuals which would consider themselves as liberals in an Anglo-Saxon sense, while still retaining many of the anti-German tenets, such as solidarity with Israel and the United States, defense of liberal Western society, and anti-totalitarianism. Despite the fragmentations which the movement has undergone, it has proven influential and has managed to change at least some attitudes in a country where, according to a recent poll, 77% see Israel as a threat to world peace. Nevertheless, while the anti-Germans have had influence far beyond their small numbers due to the comparably high intellectual level of their leading thinkers, they remain a minority within the broader left. While they have had a positive effect on the German left in the past, this has been subject to certain limits. It is impossible to be certain if the influence of the anti-Germans will be lasting, will expand further, or if the movement has already passed its zenith. However, the fact that it has produced a number of important intellectuals who, though no longer perceiving themselves as anti-Germans, may shape public discourse in the years to come cannot be ignored.